Ever get that feeling, like someone's not just telling you what to think, but like trying to control how you think about it?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, that's kind of what we're getting into today. We're diving into this whole world of conservative media, specifically its impact, how it works.
Right.
And we're using Chapter 5 from Liberal Losers by Moses Seenarine.
Great book.
It really breaks down this whole media ecosystem and, most importantly, how it affects, well, everyone, really.
Yeah, it's not just about politics. It's about, like, our entire worldview, you know?
Totally. So, ready to take a peek behind the curtain of this whole media machine?
Absolutely. And I think what's really fascinating here is how this chapter, it really like unveils the mechanics of it all. It's not just about presenting the news. It's about this force that shapes elections, policies, even those everyday conversations we have. Like
Yeah.
take media consolidation, for example. That's a real eye-opener.
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, did you know that back in 1983, 50 companies controlled most of the media?
It's wild.
But then, fast forward to 2011, and it's just, wait for it, six?
Watch.
Just six companies holding that same power. Makes you wonder, right? Like, whose voices are actually being heard out there?
It certainly does. And what I appreciate is how this chapter, it gets into specifics, whether we're talking Fox News, Breitbart, even those opinion pages in the Wall Street Journal, all heavy hitters when it comes to shaping conservative thought, that's for sure.
It's like a crash course in, understanding their strategies. But here's where it gets really interesting. The chapter, it digs into how they frame the issues, how they make it all align with their particular views.
Right. And it's not always about outright lies or anything.
Oh, it's way more subtle than that.
Exactly. It's the emotional appeals. It's cherry picking what stories to focus on. It's, you name it.
And that's what makes it so powerful, right? Because it's not always in your face.
It's sneaky like that.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what to look for, think about the 2016 election, right? Cambridge Analytica, all that.
Oh, man, that whole thing was wild.
They took Facebook data and they were able to target voters with these hyper-personalized messages, playing on people's fears and biases.
Which is kind of terrifying when you think about how effective that kind of micro-targeting can be.
It's very effective.
And then, well, I mean, how can we forget the elephant in the room, or should I say the Twitter-in-chief himself, Donald Trump?
Yeah, his use of Twitter was, you gotta admit, it was game-changing. Whether you liked him or not, the guy, he knew how to use it.
For sure.
And this chapter, it highlights how he completely bypassed all that traditional media. He controlled the narrative, mobilized his base, and all it took was a single tweet.
It's both fascinating and a little terrifying how he could just bypass everyone and go straight to millions of people.
For sure.
But, it's not just about Trump, right? This chapter, it also delves into the rise of this whole other thing, right-wing talk radio and podcasts.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
We're talking like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Ben Shapiro. These voices, they've become institutions in conservative media.
Huge, yeah. And their reach is just massive. What's crucial to understand is how they do it. They tap into this very specific sense of, like, populist anger, criticizing the elites, fostering this sense of grievance among the listeners.
So they're essentially creating this echo chamber, right, where people only hear what confirms their existing beliefs, and anyone who disagrees is like the enemy or part of the problem.
100%. And this chapter, it doesn't just talk in theory. It gives some concrete examples of how this stuff plays out in the real world.
Oh, yeah. Give me an example.
Well, remember all those claims about Dominion voting systems after the 2020 election?
How could I forget?
Fox News, they ended up having to pay almost $800 million to settle a defamation lawsuit over that whole thing.
Whoa. That's a pretty hefty price tag for, spreading misinformation.
That's what I'm saying. It just underscores the power these outlets have and the very real consequences of the things they say. And then there's, well, the tragic case of Alex Jones and Sandy Hook.
Ugh, yeah, that whole thing is just awful.
It is. This chapter mentions how he was ordered to pay almost $1.5 billion for pushing those horrible, just awful conspiracy theories. Yeah. It's a stark reminder of the harm that comes from, well, from unchecked misinformation. It makes you think, about the responsibility that should come with having a platform as big as these media figures and outlets do.
No kidding. We've covered a lot of ground already, and it's a lot to take in. Maybe we can pause for a sec, see what's standing out to you so far, what's resonating with you at this point in our dive.
It's a lot, right? Like, where do you even begin to unpack all this?
Yeah.
And this chapter, it really drives home this point that it's not just about, flat out lies. It's about framing things, presenting things in a way that really distorts, distorts reality. Like, take this whole idea of liberal bias, that they're constantly pushing.
Right.
It's this powerful narrative, and it kind of undermines trust in any other perspective. Exactly. And it all feeds into this us versus them mentality that we see everywhere now. Anyone who disagrees, they're not just wrong, they're the enemy, part of some big conspiracy. But, this framing, it has real world consequences, and the chapter really digs into that. It influences how people vote, their views on like all these important social issues, even like how susceptible they are to conspiracy theories.
It's like they're literally creating these different realities, and people are just, I don't know, stuck in the one that fits their existing beliefs. And the chapter uses climate change as a prime example of this.
Yeah, that's a big one. They've been incredibly effective at downplaying how urgent of an issue climate change is, like actively pushing these narratives that completely contradict, what scientists are saying.
It's wild.
And it's not just climate change. Look at the way they cover social justice movements, Black Lives Matter, for example.
Yeah, or any kind of protest, really, it feels like.
Right. It's like they present it as this threatening thing, something to be afraid of, rather than something to try to understand.
Exactly. Instead of, having a nuanced conversation, it's just fear-mongering.
Totally. They often portray these movements as like radical, dangerous, even un-American, which obviously shapes how the public sees them and can like really hinder progress on really important issues like racial justice.
It's all connected. It's like a web, right?
Yeah.
The way they choose to frame these issues, the language they use, it all feeds into a very specific worldview, one that feels, I don't know, threatened by change, threatened by diversity.
100%. And it's not just social issues either. Think about what it does to our political discourse. This constant, barrage of partisan messaging, the way they demonize the other side, it erodes trust in, our democratic institutions. And it just fuels more polarization.
It's like we're living in two different countries, speaking two different languages. Have you ever felt that way?
All the time. And this chapter, it makes this point that when people are constantly bombarded with information that just confirms their biases, it gets harder and harder to even have a meaningful dialogue.
Oh, I feel that.
To find common ground. It's rough out there.
It's like we're forgetting how to talk to each other, how to listen with an open mind.
Exactly. And that's why this whole issue of diversity within conservative media is so important. And the chapter touches on this too. This lack of diverse voices, not just in terms of, race or ethnicity, but also ideology, lived experience. It all contributes to this very narrow, very homogenous perspective.
It's like we're looking at this incredibly complex picture through a tiny little peephole.
Perfect analogy.
We miss the bigger picture, all the nuances, the human stories behind the headlines.
Exactly. Without those diverse voices, it's easy to fall into stereotypes. You miss out on the chance to engage with different perspectives that could challenge the status quo,
Totally. So, where does this leave us? We've talked about the influence of conservative media, their tactics, how they shape our perceptions, the lack of diversity within those outlets. It's a lot to grapple with. What are you thinking right now? What's sticking with you from all of this? It can feel kind of overwhelming, right? How do we even navigate this whole media landscape when it feels so, I don't know, deliberately skewed? It's like this chapter, it's saying, hey, be aware of this stuff, but it doesn't really give us a way out.
Well, I wouldn't say there's no way out, but you're right. It can feel overwhelming.
Yeah.
But you've hit on something really important. Awareness is the first step. This chapter, it's not just about criticizing conservative media.
It's more like a wake-up call. Right.
Exactly. It's a call to action for all of us to be more, aware, more discerning about the information we're consuming.
So, taking responsibility for our own media diets?
100%, yeah.
Okay, so what does that look like practically? I mean, are we supposed to, swear off certain news sources completely?
Not necessarily. It's more about, approaching all media with a critical eye. Question things. And one really effective strategy is diversifying your media intake. Don't just stay in your comfort zone. Actively seek out news and perspectives that challenge what you think you know.
I like that. It's you wouldn't eat the same thing every day.
Exactly.
You need a balanced diet to stay healthy. So how do we actually find those diverse voices, especially when it feels like, I don't know, everything's getting more and more homogenous?
It definitely takes effort. But there are resources out there. Look into some independent media outlets. Maybe explore news sources from different countries and try to find journalists, commentators, people from all kinds of backgrounds.
So be proactive, do your own research, and definitely don't just take things at face value, right?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Speaking of which, fact-checking is crucial in this day and age. Just because something aligns with your views doesn't mean it's true.
100%. You got to develop that healthy skepticism, especially online. verify information, like triple check it if you have to. Be wary of those crazy headlines, those that use all the emotional language, you know the ones.
Oh, totally.
And always consider the source and like what their biases might be,
Yeah.
because everyone's got them.
It's about being a critical thinker, asking questions, and I think being open to the possibility that, hey, maybe you don't have all the answers.
Yeah, humility goes a long way.
Totally.
And maybe just as important is remembering like the power of actual civil discourse.
Yeah.
It's okay to disagree. It's good to have different viewpoints,
Yeah.
but let's try to do it, respectfully without attacking each other or spreading misinformation ourselves.
Right. Engage with those different opinions, listen with an open mind, be willing to actually change your perspective if you hear something that challenges what you thought.
Now you're talking. It's about being open to learning and growing, even if it means questioning what you thought you knew.
This deep dive has been a lot.
It really has,
In a good way.
for sure.
We've gone deep on conservative media's influence, all those tactics they use, how it all shapes the way we see the world, and maybe most importantly, how we can actually become more informed, more discerning media consumers. Because we can't just be passive about this,
You
right?
can't. It all comes down to this. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
But with that power, there's got to be a responsibility to use it wisely.
Love that.
Be critical, be curious, be engaged, because ultimately, your choices, they matter.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And you know what? We didn't even get to the whole world of media defamation lawsuits, like that whole thing with Sarah Palin suing the New York Times.
Oh, man.
Oh,
Another time, another deep dive.
right. But for now, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you from this conversation? What's going to change for you moving forward? This isn't just about like conservative media. It's about all of us being active participants in creating a world that's more informed, more equitable. Until next time, keep asking those questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.